Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session on experimental cinema of the 21st century. We are going to try and map the new frontiers which confront 21st century filmmaking, cinema going, cinema viewing from the two perspectives of the world and what is happening in India. Just a few housekeeping announcements, disclaimers. This lecture is being recorded for the purpose of this refresher course in film studies being conducted by the Teaching and Learning Center of the Ramanujan College of Delhi University. No part of this lecture may be recorded by any of the participants, uploaded somewhere. You can refer to this lecture, but no part of it will be without my permission and consent be used online elsewhere except for by Ramanujan College through this Teaching and Learning Center. All of you are welcome to send me feedback. Here is my email address. You may please note it down. And if ever you feel like coming over to Chandigarh, want to have a cup of tea with me, discuss about experimental cinema, I would be very happy to. Now, what is the meaning of experiments? Let's first trace that. What do we really mean by experiments and what is experimental cinema? Well, to my mind, cinema and experiments are synonymous terms. You already may be aware of the history of cinema. You know how cinema was invented, discovered, invented in the laboratories of chemists and scientists who were experimenting with chemical sciences, with chemicals of different kinds, emulsions of different kinds. And the earlier experiments were in photography, and then there was an attempt to conduct moving images. And very slowly at the turn of 20th century, cinema was discovered as a means of exhibition, entertainment, expression, communication, record keeping. There were various uses of cinema which were of filmmaking or filming which were discovered, and cinema as a genre of art was established in the first 25 years of the 20th century with the experiments being conducted in the style of and the treatment of cinema, the content of cinema. How do you put it together? So in fact, there were the whole area of scientific films. Georges Méliès and so many other filmmakers were experimenting. So these were experiments with the form of it, with the medium. So experiments in cinema, we could understand it through two ways. One is experiments within cinema as well, which is new ideas and new styles of storytelling. And throughout 20th century, you will find these new ideas were being discovered. One of the major transitions which occurred in cinema was invention of sound and congealing sound with the visual imagery. And then the political movements of 1960s and 70s threw up another kind of cinema, which was largely dwelled upon editing style. So editing as a technique was developed much more as a idiom of storytelling, especially artistic storytelling. And then 70s and 80s was another shock to cinema with the invention of video art. So videos and video art and video making almost threatened to derail the idea of cinema. And then in 90s with ICT applications and digital cinema, at the turn of the 21st century, has created new models of filmmaking storytelling. Experiments in cinema also are aligned with the industrial production. They can be industrial. So you would find it in popular mainstream film, in Hollywood cinema, how it has changed over the years, in studio films found all over Europe, and in the independent films. So all kinds of experiments go on in all kinds of cinemas. It's not just confined to a particular kind of experiments are not confined to a particular kind of cinema, but they have been happening all around. And then there is a genre of experimental films, which are very self-consciously experimenting. So they do not dwell upon the traditional commercial imperatives, they reject them. They also try to reject the cause and effect idea of filmmaking, you know. Um, so they look at alternative ways of uh, narrative storytelling, how to construct a narrative. And then many of them reject the industrial production models as well. Experimental films are very intimate, niche films, so they sometimes operate on no budgets or micro budgets. They're small gauge, sometimes abstract. Only a very small niche audience is able to access them, and they are also irreverent sometimes. So this is what I'm going to treat these two parts in this entire discussion with you. Experiments in cinema and then experimental films. Both are important for us to understand how the experimental cinema making has occurred. Since this is a very synchronic discussion that we are undertaking, 21st century, so I assume that you would have some idea of the major experiments which have occurred throughout the 20th century. So I will directly take you to one major development of 20th century, late 20th century, which has opened up the frontiers of cinema. And although I will also look at some of the popular mainstream films, but I will uh, dwell much more on this idea of expanded cinema. So when cinema goes out of the cinema hall and it becomes a kind of a film and projection events. In a way, expanded cinema is also a recall of the early days of cinema when it was more exciting, it was more experimental, when the idea of what we call film language, although I sort of disagree with it, but still it's a standard way of looking at the film, how films are made, and how especially the narrative films are seen and interpreted. So this film language was being developed, and expanded cinema tries to go back to it. In fact, there is another idea which operates, on the big cinema and the small cinema, the secret cinema. So the big cinema is a narrative cinema which acquired a very industrial nature, exhibiting nature, entertainment and profit-making kind of a cinema with well-established marketing practices. And there was this secret or small cinema which aligned to the more artistic nature of cinema, experimental nature of cinema. In fact, if we look at, this term expanded cinema, which was developed in 1960s, this term, um, we look at, how film and video art, which are actually very contradictory by nature, by the stylistic nature and the kind of framing they have, and the kind of aesthetics they follow. So these two actually congeal, they come together. So, this expanded cinema would look at something which is very spectacular, like the French wave filmmaking style, and also something which is very materialistic in nature. So, which dwells upon the very material of cinema. I'm looking at filmmakers who would paint on cinema films, the celluloid films, or filmmakers who would scratch, like Stan Brakhage, I'll mention him later, who would scratch the film material to create and then paint over it to create images. So some kind of expanded cinema is also expanded the field of vision. Uh, so, uh, so the idea of cinema as a separate entity is thrown out of the window, and especially in the new ICT age, when it is melding with the cybernetic spaces, making use of computer technologies to create, uh, cinema experiences, how the films travel, the idea of using ICT applications. In fact, you must have already read it, or you will read it, how the very study of cinema has changed because of the cybernetic space, how we can pause the films and then look at, examine each frame, which was something of a luxury. Earlier film critics, students, and those who wrote and thought about cinema dwelled largely uh, on their mnemonics, their memory. Or I still remember when a computer, I have seen an age of cinema, like many of us may have, uh, but an age of cinema where no computers, no DVDs were available. So one had to depend upon the memory. And um, I have also done something which older generation would do, that is take diligent notes while watching a film, because you don't know whether you're going to get to watch the film again, or the whole idea of watching the film again and again, start from the start to the end. So computer age has changed that, the way we watch cinema, all of that. So naturally, the way filmmakers are responding to the cybernetic space is also has brought in changes into cinema techniques. And of course, expanded cinema also looks at the cinema, the very nature of cinema, and how its ontology, its nature, its existence, and look at the more, it examines more simple elements of the medium, So there would be, I remember watching this exhibition of spilling the light beam from projectors. It was actually called Spill of the Light, or looking at the bare bulb. So from large materialistic, starkly materialistic cinema, expanded cinema also looks at the bare minimum of cinema. So in fact, the film medium itself is questioned, and therefore, the development of what is called as film loops, or looking at cinema as a repetition, or an act of cinema as a repetition. Sometimes even looking at our minds, what happens in our mind, like we keep on repeating one scene of a film when we watch it again and again. So filmmakers and artists come up with this kind of a loop which goes in our mind. So looking at the film medium itself, and going beyond the film machine and responding to it. So this is what expanded cinema looks at: the philosophy of cinema, expansion of cinema beyond the cinema, going the theater, the film theater disciplinary urge, going beyond it and expanding cinema. So cinema in expanded cinema would go to exhibition halls, museums. It would become an installation art. So if I look at the 21st century, what are the major experiments that have occurred in narrative style and content? And I want to just trace these experiments through these filmmakers who appeared on the scene and have created these eddies and flows, eddies and troughs of experiments. So through their works, of course, there are many more than this, but I just thought just like to give you an idea. So Tom Tykwer's Run, Lola, Run is one of the most astonishing style, which, so the film was made in 1998, and it's an experimental thriller film. And what Tom Tykwer has done in it is he has divided the film into three parts, three equal parts of 20 minutes each, and they play as a loop. And every part has a different ending because of the little changes in time and incidents which occur with different outcome. So the basic story is that the protagonist, Lola, gets a call from her partner, and he says that she has only this much time to get the money to him, otherwise he would be killed. And apparently he's about, so what happens is that she, in order to save him, and she has only 20 minutes, so she has to make to rescue him, she has to do a few things which she there's that's there in the background. We know that there are these few things that have to be done in order to save the boyfriend. So in the 20 minutes loop, she tries to save him. There's a bit of a introduction of the film, and there's a bit of a conclusion of the film. So it's run like a video game with three different endings of the similar events, because it looks at the idea of free will, it looks at the role of chance. This also is a kind of a illustration of the chaos theory, the butterfly effect, but also looks at the video game culture, where the players play a particular set of events with different kinds of outcomes every time. uh, well, it was the film idea was drawn from an earlier film of Krzysztof Kieślowski, but he also looks at some of the other filmmakers who have made these kinds of cinema. So Tom Twyker's experiment of Run Lola Run was extremely experimental. He used colors which are used in video games, which jump out, very saturated colors, and the entire structure of the film appeared to be like that of a video game. Other Another filmmaker, Wong Kar-wai, who's made a large number of experimental films from Hong Kong, and he started making films in 1980s and 1990s. One of his most famous films was made in 1994, Chungking Express. But I have brought in the illustration of In the Mood for Love and its sequel 2046, which he made at the turn of 21st century. Um, what kind of a film 2046 is? It's a kind of a part sequel to In the Mood for Love. And there are four stories that the film follows. And what happens is that the narrative is very non-chronological in nature. So it takes viewers' participation to put together the narrative. It appears in pieces. It appears in, and it's a very futuristic film where it is set in 2046, and most of the earth has undergone major changes. Now, again, the kind of aesthetics that he has used, of course, the narrative style is very non-chronological. In fact, at the turn of the 21st century, there was an attempt to break away from the causality. And many of the narrative filmmakers also were creating films which shied away and consciously overturned the idea of cause and effect or the linearity. So this film also follows the aesthetics of non chronological order, and you know the film again looks at a future. So he's imagining what the future would be like. There is a bit of a time travel, there's a bit of a bending of the time. uh, so um, the film sort of looks at the treatment of the use of colors, the language, the kind of mise en scène is uh, is very futuristic, very 21st century. So in a way, it inaugurates and is serves as a prescient, or it sort of anticipates the science fiction kind of a filmmaking style and techniques which followed. This was made in the early parts of the 21st century. So In the Mood of Love was made in 2000, and 2046 was made in 2004. So it anticipates the science fiction, sci-fi genre, which has now become a sort of a cliched hallmark. Todd Haynes' I'm Not There, and Carol. Carol is a recent production. I'm Not There is a 2007 musical film. Once again, uh, very interestingly, he uses six actors to depict the public persona of Bob Dylan, the very famous American songwriter, singer, who has been also awarded the Nobel Prize for his songs. And these six actors are very different actors. So there's a male actor, Christian Bale. There's a female actor, Kate Blanchett. Then there is Heath Ledger. Richard Gere, the um, the the age group is very different. There is also a very young actor, almost um, uh, the actor was not even an adult, barely an adult when the film was made. And so there's Richard Gere, then there is Benjamin Wishaw, and then there is Marcus Carl Franklin, who is a very young boy. And so the film follows a non-traditional narrative technique, and the storylines is uh, you know given to us from these perspectives, and there is an intercutting of the storylines. um, so title of the film is taken from one of the recorded songs of Dylan. The song was never really officially released. So there is a this non-linear narrative in which there is a shifting of the storylines, and the kind of characteristics that these characters perform. So one is a poet, another is a prophet, another is a outlaw, another is a fake person who does hustling. There's another person who is a rock fading star, rock and roll. So all of these different facets of Dylan, they are depicted by these different, and all the influences that Dylan says that he has had. So using six different actors, different characteristics and depiction. So it was a very astonishing film when it came out. And then Carol, again in treatment, and the way it is a period drama, and the way it depicts romance and love. It sort of, I won't say it's a non-traditional narrative, but it definitely is a non-traditional way in which love is depicted in a very non-dramatic, but it's a period film which doesn't appear to be like a period film. Carol is a recent production. And then we move on to Ari Folman's Waltz with Bashir. Again, a very interesting political experiment. It's a animated war documentary meant for adults, and it is based on um, Folman's own experiences of memories, suppressed memories, and his experience as a soldier in the Lebanon War. So the entire documentary is animated, completely animated, and uh, the in disconnected memories are filled with commentaries and actual footage, uh, archival footage from drawn from various researches, and they are used in the film. So there is a narrative of Bashir himself. It's a kind of a narrative he puts together where he's suffering from nightmares, and he's suffering from various kinds of psychological trauma, and he pieces together this the film through that, the fractured memory, and he fills the memory with then um, uh, other ideas and what other people tell him. So the film brings in different media together. So there is a animation, there is a actual footage, photographs, uh, but news archive footage form that commentary of people. Um, and the entire film is, otherwise it combines classical music. uh, there are some graphics, realistic graphics that are used. There are some very surrealistic scenes. There are illustrations. It's sometimes feel like a comic, and sometimes actually feel like an animated film. uh, in fact, after a while you forget that it's an animated film. And the use of sound is also very, because he's relying on sound, giving him the vital uh, the vitals. Then I come to this filmmaker, Alejandro Inaritu, and I take the example of the trilogy of Death, Amoris Peros, 21 Grams, and Babel, where he uses multiple narratives, the style of multiple narratives to outlay the stories of people who are suffering from various kinds of losses. uh, Amoros Peros of three people, unlikely people who never likely to meet, but they do meet at one crucial scene. Then 21 grams again of how incidents, coincidence brings people together, and they find some kind, because of the common loss, they try to find some kind of a common ground. um, so they are all all these three films are marked by multiple narratives, um, with established stories, and they interweave with each other, and one story affect the other. So in a way, Inaritu is trying to create that whole idea that there's nothing called as randomness in the world. Actions of one person will have an effect on the life of another person. So, and there is nothing chance or random in the world. So these three films form trilogy, and other films also of Inaritu, who has conducted these experiments. And then I come to Carlos Regades, who at the very turn of the first decade of the century made this beautiful film, Silent Light, um, where he's looking at a particular kind of a community in uh, and looking at how so it's a very it's a kind of a cinema which is known as slow cinema, and he made use of non-actors. He just picked up people who were not trained into acting, um, and he depicts scenes from Mennonite community in Mexico, and how that community lives. It's an anthropological film made at an industrial level. It's a beautiful cinematography, and he uses techniques to bring to light uh, how this community lives, and how they um, their daily life processes. How do they come to terms with loss? And the entire film actually recalls the Russian filmmakers Andrei Tarkovsky, and even the European filmmakers who dwelled upon the emotion and the experience more. And then post Tenebras Lux, another mind-bending film where he has done away with the narrative completely. So it's a it's a completely surrealistic experience for the audience. So there's no ending, no beginning, and what we have to interpret each and every scene based on our understanding of it. So completely non-narrative. And again, he makes use of different kinds of media, uh, animation, CGI trickery, uh, computer generated images, and actual people, and uh, to construct this film. Then I take you to the avant-garde experimental filmmakers of the 21st century. Some of them were active during 20th century as well, like James Benning, but some of his best work has come out uh, in the 21st century. So I have culled out a clip for you. Clip one is James Benning's film. So it's a long film, more than 1 hour long. So you can have a look at it. Uh, and come back to the discussion, or maybe you can have a look at it after the discussion at a later stage. Uh, then I also move on to filmmakers like Peter Hutton, Ben Rivers, Ken Jacobs, Stan Brakhage, whom I mentioned earlier, would scratch the surface of the film, the celluloid material, uh, and then paint over it or throw paint on it um, to create images. And clip 2 actually pertains to one of his films, so you can have a look at it, and you will notice how many of these avant-garde filmmakers and experimental filmmakers. If you were able to find some of their works on YouTube, online, or on Vivo, or on some other format, very difficult to catch, um, because they are, again, they're operating on small budgets, so they don't have marketing budgets to go through big. So distribution system, as you know, world over is very difficult. So even with online platforms, because many of these filmmakers are making films using their money, many of them are doing day jobs, and then at night they are making these films. So they are not able to make available their works. Some of the works are available, some of them are not. Stan Brakhag's works are available because he's considered as a very important filmmaker in America. His films are part of the Library of Congress and have found a wider distribution. So you should be able to find his films. So Stan Brakhage makes use of that scratching of the celluloid uh, material itself, and his films use the idea of flicker, of the materialist nature of of visuality. And Apichatpong Virsanthankul is a Thai filmmaker. Uh, he has made several of his films along Mekong River. Mekong River is actually one of his, the Mekong Hotel is one of his very well-known films. And once again, each and every frame of his film is like an art. So even if he's uh, filming a scene of a cow or a scene of a buffalo, he looks at it from an artistic point of view, and in that sense, it's a very conscious filmmaking. Uh, Unlike the uh, in politics of cinema, one looks at how filmmakers use cinema as a medium to profit, and then there are filmmakers who look at the cinematic medium and what they are filming as a kind of a ritual, as a kind of a spiritual exercise. And you will find Apichat Pong Virsanthankul's films are marked by that spirituality of cinema, not a spirituality sitting over cinema, but the way he looks at his uh, looks at what through the viewfinder is not just a subject, but is an image, a person that he reveres. So he respects them. So you will find that quality in his filmmakers. And then Jonas Mekas, uh, one of the most astounding filmmakers to have come out, very ethical, very political. So his films have he has been active in the later part of the 20th century, but also even now, till he breathed his last a couple of years back, he was making films. And Guy Maddin, and the Canadian filmmaker who's made short cinema, again, materialistic experiments, and he tries to retrace the cinema from its early times, where it was more an experiment, ritual, rather than just a exhibitionist nature of cinema was then exploited for profit making or narrative cinema. So he tries to relocate his works in that early experimental cinema. And Peter Kubelka, Jennifer Reeves, Nathaniel Dosky, Harun Faruqi, once again, a very politically conscious filmmaker. And he tries to dwell upon filmic images uh, as political interpretation, images as a way of doing political interpretation. So it's not that his he's one of those filmmakers who has been able to synthesize politics with image making. And Deborah Startman and Ben Russell. This is not an exhaustive list. There are a large number of filmmakers, who have dwelled upon experiments. But these are just few filmmakers I just wanted to bring to your attention so that you can follow them and look at them and examine some of them if it interests you further. And then there are some other experiments. There's one particular experiment which I wanted to bring to your attention, was the one which was done by Jan Arthurs Bertrand, who made this film Home. And I have culled out for you the entire film that he has made. It's a French documentary film. It's an example of how environmentalist and ethical filmmakers are now making films in a non-industrial way, in a ecological way. So films, as you know, are also, especially the industrial cinema with big budgets, is a wasteful exercise sometimes, or is considered as counterproductive. So it's a very capitalistic way of exploiting the very nature of the production line. So ethical filmmakers try to compose their films in a way that they are ethically correct. So Home actually marks, it's a homage to the planet Earth, and it is entirely composed of aerial shots. Sometimes some of these aerial shots were taken through a helicopter. Sometimes they were just a hot air balloon was suspended and cameras were placed, and these aerial shots were taken in various places on Earth. And it basically is a homage to show the diversity of life and how humanity is threatening, or how ecological imbalances are threatening to disturb this. Um, so the film took over a large, it was filmed over more than a year, 1.5 years. And they had a small helicopter, and they went to various regions over 15 countries to film this. And they used high definition Cineflex cameras, and they would suspend it uh, through the rails of the helicopter. So many of these cameras were manufactured for army firing, for army, but they used them and to to create this entire film. And the film was entirely promoted on a YouTube channel called as Home Project. So its distribution also tried to avoid the larger distribution channels, with their uh, para cinematic element, para marketing elements. And the entire film is actually available in different parts. The filmmakers uploaded it in marking in celebration of the P2P culture, people to people culture. They uploaded the entire film online, and it was available on YouTube, and it's available in various P2P websites. Um, P2P websites are sometimes also called as torrent websites, because there is an attempt to also um, kind of uh, so I haven't brought any examples from the P2P culture, but P2P culture, as far as sharing is concerned, I'm sure some one of the lecturers, teachers, facilitators will dwell upon it during the course of this study, that how people to people culture has changed cinema too. In fact, there are collaborative projects which are going on. In fact, pandemic has thrown in quite a few projects. I haven't brought in examples of that yet, but there are these various kinds of collaborative projects where a filmmaker will call out two filmmakers placed in different parts of the world, and they would make these anthology films or collaborative films. Uh, Usually, they are, till now they are considered as sort of worthy of only reels or small YouTube videos, but there are filmmakers who are attempting to create a cinema out of it. So many of the, as you all in cinematic history as well, many early experiments in cinema were not taken seriously till cinema acquired uh, a uh, much more acceptable vocabulary or grammar, or when large number of people started participating in cinematic activities. And of course, handheld cameras and video cameras and nowadays phone cameras has revolutionized the way we view cinema and the way we make cinema. And some of the very well-known filmmakers like Jean-Luc Godard has made films on complete films, film socialisme on the iPhone. And there are other filmmakers who are trying it to make films on phones, making use of technologies, uh, of ICT technologies and cinematic technologies. So time lapse has now become a kind of a standard technique, um, which is possible now to place a phone or a camera and then forget it. And drone culture has brought in a different kind of uh, imaging. And then uh, the sound cloud and the availability of sound files and sound systems are creating further ideas of how sound can be developed. No longer Foley artists are needed, or no longer superimposition or creation of music is needed. So sound files can be used to create. In fact, the idea of using one kind of a sound, same music and different kind of cinema, there are experiments being conducted all over the world, everywhere, regarding this. So 21st century has thrown in newer ideas, and they are still in developmental stages. And as we go along, we will find that these developments will become more and more available in exciting forms for us. Uh, it's always uh, a, it's always a chase to look at experimental cinema synchronically, but definitely the way we view cinema and respond to it is changing. And with cinema studies now becoming almost like a household phrase and much required, and there are other uses of cinema other than just for those who are engaged with film studies. uh, I'm sure even the way we look at cinema, the way we, not just as an audience, but as students, as those who are engaged in looking at cinema philosophically for its art, will also change. So these are some of the ideas drawn, as an introduction uh, to experiments in the world cinema. And the second part of this discussion, I intend to take up the case study of India.